Today we're going to talk about writing equations from graphs. How do I go from this picture to the equation it represents? Now, if it's multiple choice, I could just put each one of these equations into Desmos and see who matches my graph. But what if it's not multiple choice? We're going to talk about both. This is factored form. We'll talk about that because that's an easy way to lead into it. But ideally, you're always going to see it in regular quadratic form, which we've been dealing with the last 2 weeks. So, with our quadratic graph, first, everything is about the x-axis. We know that the x-axis is 1, the x-intercept. We know, 2, the x-axis is the zeros of the graph. We also know that the x-axis holds the roots and the solutions. That's the big deal. If I want to know this, I need to know the solutions for my graph. So basically, what we're going to do is find the solutions of our graph and work backwards. We're going to start by working smarter, not harder. The first thing we're going to do is say, hey, if we know whether or not it's a minimum or a maximum, that right there can eliminate 2 of these equations because it means my A coefficient's positive or negative. Remember, with a minimum, it's the lowest point on the graph. A maximum, the highest point on my graph. With a minimum, the A is positive. With a maximum, the A is negative. So first, looking at this graph here, it makes an N. Well, if it makes an N, it's a maximum, which means my A is negative. That means my coefficient in the front of the whole darn thing, when we're talking about ax squared plus bx plus c, and I'm just going to have it equal y, because it equals y over here, that this number here in the front is going to be negative. So right away, when I'm looking at these 4 choices, these right here would distribute, and he would be negative. So right away, I know these 2 are not even a choice because I've got to have a negative up front. Now, I could pull out my Desmos calculator and I could start calculating. But I'm super smart and I don't really need it. I can do it faster without my Desmos calculator, and that's what I'm going to do. So the next thing I'm going to look at is, hey, I know that this x-axis does my solutions. So I know here it crosses here at my graph crosses here at -6, and my graph crosses here at 1. So that way I know that x equaled -6 and x equaled -1. Now, that's not my answer yet. That's what the x equaled. But if you recall from 2 weeks ago, sorry, we know that this is a final answer. We know when we had these kind of factors that each piece was equal to 0 to solve it. So let's work backwards. Just look at this side here. Let's make him equal to 0. If I want to make him equal to 0, I've got to bring this 6 over to the other side. He equals 0. He's x plus 6. If I want him to equal 0, I got to get rid of that 1. He now equals 0, but then he becomes x plus 1. If we remember back in time, 2 weeks ago, this was a factor and this was a factor that we set equal to 0. That means these factors are the factors that make up that when I FOIL them out, which I'll show you in a second, will make that solution up there. So with that, he's a factor and he's a factor. So who matches him? He matches him. He matches him. This will be my answer choice. Now, I'm not 100% sure I'm always right. So let's look here at Mr. Desmos because, he knows more than I do. So y equals, let's put in that -2. Negative 0.2, sorry, negative 0.2. Oops, got too much going on, hold on. Negative 0.2, parenthesis, then I had what? X plus 6, end of parenthesis. I had another parenthesis, x plus 1. Now, where is my graph? Oh, I put an extra weirdo thing over here. I said, where does my graph go? There's my graph. So now when I look at this right here, these are the two places it crossed my axis. These are the two places it crossed here. I'm 100% right. That's my equation for that graph. So I'm 100% right. With that as well, we're going to come back to this in a second and talk about how to get our quadratic in a second. This is called factored form. With this right here, you wouldn't be able to get that negative 0.2 unless they gave that to you. Just letting you know that up front. We're going to talk about how on the back we take that one step further to do our back ones. Okay? Let's look at the next one. All right, so still we're going to have factored form because it's baby steps to get to the big guy. So starting off here. Is he a maximum or a minimum? Well, he makes a U, so we know he's a minimum, so we know that A is positive. So right away, I'm going to come down here and knock off the negative mess. I know A is positive. That means the number in the front is going to be positive. So now, where does he cross my x-axis? Crosses my x-axis at 7 and my x-axis at 9. So we know that x equals 7 and my x-axis equaled 9. We now know that I need to make them equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides to make him 0. I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides to make him 0. Then we said, hey, remember, he's a factor and he's a factor. And then I come over here and I'm like, oh, it's got to be this one here. And let me double check it because you know I like to be precise. So get rid of that. Y equals where am I? Oh, 0.4 parenthesis x minus 9 and a parenthesis x minus 7 and a parenthesis. Scoot my graph over. Nice thing about touch screens. Right here I got 7. Right here I got 9. Right here I got 9. Perfecto. I'm perfect. I'm correct. That's going to be the first part of the homework you do this week. Right there. Now with that, the second part for the first day, you're going to add on to it just one step. And we're practicing this all week. But the first day you're going to start off with just the factored form. Then we're going to move into our regular equations. So part of your assignment is going to have this as your choices, and part of your assignment is going to have these whole big guys as your answers, okay? Now, with that, unfortunately, some of these aren't going to be as good. I'm going to come back and explain how to get here on this because some of these don't cross perfectly. When they cross perfectly, which is why I chose this first, if I want the quadratic equation, that's the y equals ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If I want that, all I have to do now is multiply this out to get that. Now, the reason I said you can't get this 0.2 just by doing the graphs right here, so I would have to add this in the front. But now I can just go ahead and distribute. So I'm going to distribute to the first piece. 0.2 times 6 gives me 1.2. That's all still together because all I did was distribute the first one. I've done nothing with this yet. Now I'm going to FOIL. So let me go ahead and FOIL. So I have 0.2x squared plus 0.2x plus 1.2x plus 1.2 equaling 0. I'm going to add my middle piece together. And this would be the equation right here of my graph. All I have to do is FOIL it. Now, unfortunately, on the next piece, we're going to eliminate some stuff, but we're going to have to look at the graph because some of the equations aren't pretty. If your equation crosses this line pretty, you can do what we did. When it doesn't, you can't. So, let's look at my next example. this one here, we can eliminate stuff just like we did before. We know that, first of all, correct is a minimum. He made a U. Exactly. You're right. So he looks like this. So with this now, we know that A is positive. With A being positive, I know this can't be an answer choice and this can't be an answer choice. So which one of these is my answer choice? Now, there's a couple things we can look at here which makes it easier, and I'll talk about that and then we'll look at it at Desmos, is when we're looking here, this y-intercept on my graph where it crosses the y-axis is also my constant in my equation. That means it is my C. So here, my y-intercept equals -6. That means that this piece right here has to be -6, so he has to be my answer. There's just certain things to look at. Different graphs, different things to look at. So let's see. Let's clear this out. Let's put this in and see if it matches the equation. So y equals 3x squared plus 4x minus 6. Let's move it over. Yeah, he's a little bit past the 2 and he's a little past the 1, right? So it is correct. It is correct. Because the y-intercept, because if you think about the y-intercept to find it means all my x's are 0. If I took this equation and made all my x's 0, my y-intercept is going to be -6. Do you remember when we did that way back when? We made this 0, we made this 0. So then my y-intercept would equal -6, way back when in time. So there's something else different you can look at besides punching it into Desmos 4 different times. Just makes it a little bit quicker, and it makes you just understand the graph a little bit more. So now, we have 2 more we're going to look at. This next one here, all right, again, it's a U. So if it's a U, do I have a max or a min? Exactly, I have a min. And because I have that minimum, my A is positive. So now, ding, 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 ding. So I'm only down to these 2 at the bottom. Now, because I like to cheat and do things quickly, we know that the y-intercept is here. The y-intercept equals the C in the equation. My y-intercept equals +1, sorry. So then it has to be this equation here. So all I had to look for was max or min and y-intercept to see where I'm going to fall. And if it's the same number, I would just plug it into the calculator then. And I can plug it into the calculator again to see if it works. The last one we're going to talk about today is a weird one. So that's why I want to kind of talk about him today too. What happens here when, okay, he's not crossing. I have no x-axis. So how am I going to come up with roots or answers? Well, easy. Same idea we just did here. Is he a maximum or a minimum? Right, he's a maximum because he made the n. So my A is negative. So starting there, he's positive, he's positive, he's negative, he's negative. Now, this one is hard to see if he's crossing at the -1 or the -3, but which one do you think he's crossing at? Exactly. My y-intercept is right here, and he's at -3, which means that I went the long way, didn't I? So he has to be the -3 right here. So it needs to be this equation. But let's check that because that's kind of a weird looking equation. So let's check that guy. So y equals -10x squared minus 9x minus 3. Yeah, he's got that same looking thing going on right there. He kind of crosses right there. Perfect, I'm good. And you certainly can go ahead and put it in all 4 times, But use that brain. You all are really smart, and you can see where he's going to cross, and you can eliminate a lot of your answer choices before you get started. But you use Desmos, look at the graphs. This week, we're only looking at these two different forms. We're going to match graphs to equations pretty much the whole week. And then do a little review at the end. Also, with the little review at the end, I want to bring in one little point. In your Desmos activity at the end of the week, it's going to have you it's going to have you match a graph with a solution. Not a graph, excuse me, an equation with a solution. But remember what I said back at the beginning. If I gave you the equation x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0, and I said, what are its solutions? Well, you can do it the hard way. There's 3 ways you can do it, okay? 1, we can factor and solve, which is what we did 2 weeks ago. 2, I can use that quadratic formula and solve, and that'll give me my answers. Or 3, I can use the graph. Just like I said way at the beginning of this. If I take my calculator to use the graph, I'm just going to cover that up for a second. Let me just put this in the calculator. What do I get? So y is the same thing as 0 equals x squared minus 5x plus 6. I'm going to come up over here, and if I touch my graph, I get my 2 main points. Did I hit the right ones yet? So it says, hey, you have 2, 0, and you have 3, 0 that cross the x-axis. So, just like we did earlier, that's that whole thing earlier with the factors. So I know here, and I'm just going to move this up so you can see better. Sorry, I'm towards the end of the paper. And let me go ahead and move that so it gets brighter. Sorry. So then, I know that x equaled 2 and x equaled 3. This is the whole working backwards thing. So, subtract 2. So x minus 2 equals 0. Subtract 3. X minus 3 equals 0. This is my factor here, and this is my factor here to equal 0. Oh, I didn't even have to go that far. I went too far. Sorry. I was going backwards to show you how it could work. All you need to know is those 2 things there because that's the solution. I went too far, but let's just show you how you can check. Then I can go ahead and FOIL. And you can see I got my equation. I went too far, but that's okay. In Desmos, all I need to do is put that in. These 2 right here make this right here. Those are your answer choices, and they'll be in the set notation 2, 3. It's where it crosses the x-axis. That I was just checking. Sorry, I went too far. If you have any questions, you know you can get a hold of Mr. Hurd, Ms. Brooks, or myself. We'll be glad to help you. Live session will be on Tuesday. We can go over this, or on Thursday because it's kind of spread out differently throughout the week. Have a great day. Miss you guys. Bye.